Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where this week our sale goes out to all of the high rollers out there. You can get 10% off all singles that cost $99 or more, and with the way card prices are going these days, that is a very, very long list. Masterpieces, expensive foils, literally anything from alpha or beta, all of that can be yours with 10% off all this week until Sunday the 20th of February at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time over at starcitygames.com/sale. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 44 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with Ari Lax, and this week it's all results all the time. Kamigawa Neon Dynasty has made its debut online, if not in paper just yet, and it really has made its presence felt, and there's a lot to get to this week.
Yeah, and it is a weird paper situation because I think we have like an actual pre-release legality kind of thing. Because the pre-release was this last weekend, but there was also the SCG CON, is it open still? Or the updated branding that occurred in Philly this weekend with not one, but two flights of Modern. The format is alive and well in paper. And we have a double top 8 there of pre-Kamigawa to discuss, as well as a whole bundle of Magic Online stuff with Kamigawa.
Look, now that it's not the official SCG Tour branding anymore, we don't have to pretend it's in Philly. We can call it what it is, which is the Valley Forge Casino Resort, aka the Ninth Circle of Hell, as far as I'm concerned.
Is the upper floor the 8th and the lower floor the 9th, or is it just all top to bottom the same?
It's just hell throughout. I'm not quite sure exactly what the labeling is there, but either way, I think I've made my views on that particular location well known over time. So not envious of that part of things, very envious of every other part of that experience. You know, the people who got to go out there, play some high stakes paper Magic again, had a lot of fun at home watching this. No official SCG coverage there, but a lot of backpack coverage. Both Anurag Das and Sky Warfield with their own makeshift setups going around recording their matches, some of their friends' matches, and I hadn't realized, I expected to enjoy watching the actual matches. What I didn't expect to miss so much was just the ambient noise of the tournament hall. So the kind of constant low-level background chatter at all times, punctuated by some eardrum-splitting announcement telling the sealed side event players that their round is starting.
Oh, and also just like that click-clack shuffling that is like simultaneously completely asynchronous, but also like absolutely in sync to the point where you can hear every individual card flick every single table all the way up and down. Yeah, perfect.
But so as you say, we had a pre-releases for Kamigawa going on in the same building, so probably for the best that the Sunday results did not actually have Kamigawa cards legal. Don't want people running around asking everyone if they have Besejus that they're willing to part with for $80 or whatever the extortionate price would have been on the floor. So gonna have to wait a little bit for Kamigawa to make itself known in paper, but those results still do make for some interesting reading here.
Yeah, I think there's a few highlighted things that are interesting to look at. But we can just kind of break down the two winners of the two flights to start, because I think that while they aren't necessarily the things that jumped out to me, they are both really interesting on their own. One of them was won by Burn, and the other was won by the Archon Creativity deck.
Yeah, so Burn, essentially as it was in 2018, 2019, really no updates there. And then the Archon Creativity deck, which that archetype as a whole has really come into being in the past few months. And this specific build with the focus on Archon is a relatively recent development as well.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of highlighted this a couple weeks ago as like Archon is kind of the split in the middle of like, well, Emrakul plus something else is a better combo kill. And Serra Emissary like locks out more fair decks or some other decks in specific ways by like preventing interaction. Then Archon just kind of splits it in the middle of like, if you make one Archon, it's good. If you make two Archon, it's good. It probably kills them the next turn every single time. And similar to Serra Emissary, it has like this huge recovery factor to it.
I think with all of these decks, which were around before, but maybe not floating around the top, we're going to have this question every time of how do the Kamigawa cards impact these decks? And for creativity, I think nothing much really changes. Some of the legendary lands you actually would want to put in this deck to pair with your Ren and 6. You can imagine Sokenzan as this indomitable creativity enabler. That being said, the need to enable Dwarven Mine means you really cannot get too fancy with your mana base because you will discover the limitations of that pretty quick. And then for burn, it's just good old-fashioned burn. I think there are one or two candidates for that deck, maybe in the new set, but fundamentally, the core of that deck is not going to change.
Yeah, if you played burn in any time since Eidolon of the Great Revel, or I guess was Swiftspear right after that, like we're talking like 2014, this deck has not really changed. I will note there is a surprise coming up in the league results as an addition to the creativity deck, but we'll get to that when we get there. There is a card from Kamigawa that may be worth looking at in this deck.
Mm-hmm. Looking down the rest of these top 8s, it has been fun to see some of those names who you recognize from the grind back in the day who maybe didn't partake in too much of the online stuff, but now the paper play is back, they too are back, and they're back to their old tricks. They're making these top 8s, putting up good results. So I think of the Dan Jessups of the world from one of these top 8s. And then Eli Cassis, who I guess has also flourished in the online era. I think the first Rivals member to scale the ladder, make it to the MPL. So now no slouch on any platform. But as always with Eli, there's this two-part question of, is the archetype that he's playing any good? And then secondly, is his own very unique twist on the archetype any good? And both of those questions are really at the forefront here.
Yeah, well, this is Hardened Scales. I kind of want to note that this deck has had significantly better paper results almost. Like, we've seen a handful of paper events, and I think there's been Hardened Scales in the top 8 of about half of them, whereas in Magic Online, it's just not really present. And I don't have a great explanation for why that would be the case, but it is notable that, like, it could just be random chance, but it's happened a couple times.
My best guess is that if you think that there's a lot of overlap between the cards that are good against Hammer and the cards that are good against Scales, or even just the play patterns that are good against Hammer and good against Scales, a lot of the Hammer pilots have been saying, I know Will Kruger has mentioned this a lot, that it's a lot harder to win with that deck online these days, although Will did top 8 a challenge this weekend, and Hammer was all over the online results, so that certainly isn't going anywhere. But you do gain a lot from less experienced players in paper, some of whom maybe have not kept up with all of the online developments and are playing against the deck for the first time, just leaving a lot of equity on the table there. And I think Scales doesn't really punish you as much in the way that Hammer does, where if you make one misstep or you take the shields down for one moment, you're dead. But I can easily imagine someone just looking over at some dinky board of, there's an Ozolith and there's a Zabaz over here or something, and not really appreciating how quickly that can scale up and then just dying out of nowhere to an Inkmoth Nexus, which, if you've been on the scale side of that, you've seen that math coming a while away, and you've probably been having to do that math for a full turn cycle just to double check that you didn't miss anything.
Yeah, I think this is a Sam Party line, a classic from him, where he kind of realized if you ever have to start doing the math with Hardened Scales, you're going to find out that your opponent is actually taking twice lethal damage. And that really, that was pre-Ozolith too. So that's like an extra doubling. They're just going to be at like negative 47 poison and the game will be 100% over. So yeah, I think that's fair. And the more forgiving aspect is certainly fair over a longer paper event that you aren't like playing from your pajamas with a cup of hot cocoa next to you.
Yeah, we should get into some of the specifics of Eli's list as well. So Esper Sentinel is a card which you see Scales pilots quite divided on whether this card has a role in the deck. It clearly is powerful in its own way, but not doesn't have the same support that it does in the Hammer deck. And then it is also quite difficult to cast here. You are not base white here, you are base green. And you have a bunch of colorless lands, you've got your Sagas, and you've got your Inkmoth Nexuses and so on, and just casting this card on turn 1 is easier said than done sometimes. And then he also has Steel Overseer. So this is a card which was in the very early builds of Hardened Scales back in 2018, 2019, and was always a little on the borderline there. It was quite a fragile card, and there was always a sense of, if the deck picks up something new, this is probably the first card on the chopping block here. And the deck picked up so much from MH2 and some sets beyond that, and yet in Eli's list, Steel Overseer is showing back up like nothing changed.
Yeah, I just want to highlight with Esper Sentinel that I remember playing this deck a few months ago, and one of my complaints was that on the draw versus Ragavan, because you're a non-interactive deck, things get a little dicey because you could just you would play a single 1-drop and it would die. And Esper Sentinel is kind of the card that does the best job of inverting that while remaining proactive, where they have to give you a card back or spend an extra mana that negates a lot of what Ragavan is generating. So I think that lineup is an important part of it. Steel Overseer, a little more questionable for me. I don't have a good reason I would want to be playing that card these days, besides maybe just sheer threat overload.
One thing I do like about Ely's list is the 3 welding jars in the main deck, and I think this does go hand in hand with both Esper Sentinel and Steel Overseer, where it protects the Overseer for the 1 turn cycle with it untapped, and that's often all you need to get good value out of it. And then for Esper Sentinel, the play patterns there line up really nicely, where often the opponent feels obliged to try and point a removal spell at it, and if you can save it at that stage, well then they face the same conundrum next time of they have to use another removal spell and potentially pay the tax again to avoid giving you another card back. And once they do, that's a lot of cards and a lot of time they've thrown into trying and maybe not even succeeding to kill your 1-drop. So I do like that angle there. It's also kind of neat in a deck that has Arcbound Ravager, right? Where you can either load up a bunch of modular counters onto the Sentinel to make it gigantic, and then any spell they play, you're getting a card back for the first time on their turn. Or once they go to the trouble of paying for the Sentinel trigger, using their card, you just get to sacrifice it to the Ravager and get something out on the way back.
Yeah, that is a fairly strong interaction. Also, just even not even moving all in with Ravager, it's pretty easy to just shuffle around. There is an Arcbound Worker, here's a Baz counters, just assorted ways to get it a little bit bigger. We had kind of mentioned Hammer sort of entwined with this deck. There's no Hammer in either of these top 8s.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to make of that. And from checking out those streams, it seemed like not much Hammer just in the room in general. So really struggling to make sense of that, honestly.
It could just be that maybe the dress down decks are more popular in paper, and the lineup. I'm just looking at the Izzet decks and the Grixis decks are all probably half a copy higher on dress down than the Magic Online meta might be. I know Grixis 3 dress down between the main deck and sideboard's not uncommon, but there's a lot of that going on. The Izzet decks are solidly on 2, so it might just be that the metagame is just oh, I'm gonna play 2 to 3 dress downs because it's an awesome card, and then you're playing Hammer, and that is a problem. That card is probably the worst thing to happen to you out of most of these decks.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of Izzet Murktide in these tournaments. 2 copies in both top 8s, and a decent spread of those flex slots that you have in the main deck there. So there was a list with main deck Blood Moon, another list with main deck Fury. You had Martial Others, another one of these paper crushers who I don't know if there are any interesting card choices in the list, but an all foil Izzet Murktide deck, just bringing some style to the top tables there. So Murktide, another one of these decks which as soon as you count it out, it just shows back up again and keeps performing as it always has. And it seems like that kind of question of, do you want main deck Blood Moon? Do you want main deck Fury even? And then how does that inform some of your other choices? If you have Blood Moon, then Archmage's Charm goes down a lot in value, for example. That seems to be the last lingering debate around that deck at the moment.
Yeah, and this may also be tied to the downtick in Hammer, because the rise of Hammer is what really started the transition from Murktide to Grixis Shadow, or the most recent rise in Hammer, because Murktide can beat Hammer, but it always feels like it's a few percentage points behind, even on a good day.
Maybe, and I don't know if this has any basis in fact, but one theory might be that going back to what we said a few weeks ago about Hammer being a little bit on the decline online, the format did seem to have adjusted to it in so much as it could. If you think there is something of a lag between the online results and the paper results, maybe this tournament was kind of stuck in that mentality from 2 or 3 weeks ago, where Hammer was not the be-all and end-all the way it had been for the months prior, and so that kind of carried through for that one weekend. I don't know if that, I don't know if that's even falsifiable. I don't know how you would test the strength of that carry through or that correlation or whatever. So, but we're just idly musing about that, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the other story is that there was a solid amount of cascade in these results. one top 8 with Rhinos with Karn and Living End, and then a decent amount of Rhinos floating around the top 16s of both events.
Yeah, that might almost be the opposite to what I just described, where we had speculated a while back on why aren't the Cascade decks showing up online anymore? And there was some contextual reasons. So when Blue-White was really big and it was a control deck with Teferi and Chalice of the Void, then that question kind of answered itself at that point. That deck has really dropped off recently, and so I found it increasingly difficult to answer that question. And in paper, whatever assumptions were being made that led to that online don't seem to be the case, and people are showing up with their violent outbursts and Charlotte's agents and having a good day with it.
Yeah, I think that this may also tie into the higher numbers of Izzet than Grixis in these top tables. The Grixis matchup, because of all the discard in addition to counter magic, can get a little dicey, as well as Death Shadow just kind of being a bit more problematic. Whereas like your lineups against Izzet Murktide are generally pretty good. Like Murktide Regent has a lot of problems against the interaction that the Cascade decks are showing up with. Like when you Brazen Borrower a Murktide Regent, that's good. When you Brazen Borrower a Death Shadow, that's bad. So I think that may be a benefit, as well as like Blood Moon out of the Murktide decks is not really an issue for a lot of these Cascade decks. Like it might get you, but you can just like choose not to lose to it.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from the top 8 or the rest of the top 16 deck list that we have here that you think is worth highlighting?
Well, I guess I will start on the shout out of Harley Smalley in 16th place in one of the events, naming their Yawgmoth deck The Rock, which is probably the most appropriate use of that name because it originates with Phyrexian Plague Lord like 20 years ago. So even though like The Rock has been repurposed to describe these like mid-range grindy decks, I just appreciate the fact that like the Yawgmoth deck is way more Phyrexian Plague Lord plus Deranged Hermit than any other deck that could be named that. But on that note of sacrifice, we saw a Jund sacrifice deck in one of these top 8s. There's been this Mayhem Devil Collected Company Unearthed Goblin Bombardment deck kind of popping up in the leagues every so often. And it top 8'd one of these events. It's really just a stack of good cards, but then like Mayhem Devil and company are in it.
Is Mayhem Devil not quite the unqualified good card that it has been in Standard or Historic, for example?
I think it is. So I've thought about this a little bit. I think that it is a card that is absolutely embarrassing by 2018 modern standards, but has actually gained a lot of ground over the last year because the two new removal spells, Unholy Heat and Prismatic Ending, line up a lot worse against a 3-mana 3/3 than a Lightning Bolt does. Like you can Prismatic Ending it on your turn after they've already set stuff up. You could Unholy Heat it if you line up Delirium on the spot, and if you have a Delirium Heat, like anything dies to it, so it doesn't really matter whether it's a 3/3 or 5/5 for 3. So I think that it's kind of at an all-time peak in terms of what Mayhem Devil can do in Modern. I don't really love Ignoble Hierarch as a card, so I'm kind of questioning if that is a core purpose of this deck, whether it's really what I want to be doing. It's even with Grist counting as a creature, 26 hits for company is kind of sketchy when 4 of them are Ragavan and 4 of them are Ignoble Hierarch and 2 of them are Kroxa. So there's some sketchy numbers in this deck that have kind of always existed. But there's also some powerful stuff that is getting set up.
Yeah, I do get the urge to play Mayhem Devil in a fetchland format. It feels like if you start your deck with 4 Mayhem Devil and then, let's say, 10 to 12 fetchlands, it shouldn't take that much on top of that for that to just be a very good card at that point. That being said, I'm not sure if this is the best shelf for it. I like some things about this deck and dislike others, and I think the weak point for me might honestly be the collected companies. And once you have company, I think you do need acceleration of some kind to subsidize that. So Ignoble Hierarch, I think that's how that one works its way into the deck. And then Ragavan as well is really interesting in this context, where that can be the thing that gets you up to 4 on turn 3 for your company. Or Ragavan with Mayhem Devil is really interesting too, where if the first Ragavan connects, then you can just cast a turn 2 Mayhem Devil. Or if you're amassing these treasure tokens over time, at some point you can cast a Devil, immediately sacrifice your treasures for mana, and get some Devil triggers out of that as well. So I do like some of the stuff that's going on here. I do wonder if you could just rebuild this deck without the companies and the constraints that puts on you, and then go from there. So for example, it's kind of stunning to me that we have a Mayhem Devil, Bloodghast, Sacrifice deck that doesn't want Carrion Feeder. That seems to me like the first thing I would want to pair with a lot of these cards, but in this setup, I don't know if you can find room for it. So maybe that's a place to look. Or one shell which actually is seeing some success is Piper Powell was in top 16 of the online Modern PTQ this weekend with Hogbog, Aya, Karam Chandani's, I guess Rakdos food deck might be the fairest description. Basically just the cat oven shell, which she seemingly qualifies for every set championship with, just pour it over to Modern. And we mentioned a while back that Ravenous Squirrel is just a very powerful card that didn't really have a home. And I think that was her starting point is, well, I know this card is broken from personal experience. What if we can break it in this format too? And I think that shell still has a little way to go as well, but clearly there are a few different ways you can take this.
Yeah, I'm currently looking at a Scryfall search of the word sacrifice artifact under the assumption that you could like shift your mana over to maybe use Moonsnare prototype or something similar to that in this deck, and then take full advantage of some of the synergies in those other colors that overlap with like treasure and food. So I'm wondering if there's if the problem is Collected Company, and it looks, at least to me, that Grist and Ignoble Hierarch for the most part are along for the ride with that card. If you're going to cut a color, you could add a color, and there might just be something to add in blue that gives you this kind of, extra everything. Or, again, it could just be the Squirrel deck.
Yeah, I do think Grist is a somewhat appealing card here, especially against any of the Ragavan decks, essentially. And part of that is just very good on both ends against cards like Death Shadow, Murktide Regent. So maybe you can keep Grist around in some number, but yeah, I think that something in this space is good, but I don't think anyone has quite figured out what that is yet.
You could also be an Asmore deck, again, sacrificing food, triggering Mayhem Devil, giving you just another very powerful startup plan. You're already playing Seasoned Pyromancer, Unearthed Cycles, and can recur Asmore, so that's just another thing that pops to the top of my head when looking at these cards. Yeah,
one thing in the past has been that you had to play a bunch of these cards that you wouldn't want otherwise in order to enable Asmore. So Street Wraith being the one that comes to mind. And once you have Street Wraith in your deck, then Lurrus just gets disqualified automatically. I do wonder if there are enough other good enablers that you could support Asmore without needing Street Wraith, because Asmore with Lurrus is actually a potentially very appealing interaction.
Can I talk to you about Voldar and Epicure? Like I always say whenever someone posts an Asmore deck these days, I really think that is there is a very easy to spread from very put together shell that's Epicure, Ragavan, Asmore, Ursa Saga. And from there, just you can do whatever you want. You just have to put something powerful alongside it. So again, doesn't have to be a Lurrus deck. You could be Mayhem Deviling with a lot of this stuff. I don't know if the pieces quite interlock the right way where you don't just draw a bunch of weird cards that don't fit together when you do that. But I think that there's a lot of room to explore in that range that necessarily doesn't lock you into playing a Collected Company deck.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from these paper results before we venture into the online realm for the time being?
Shout out to Mapson for ending up in 9th place with Amulet, because Mapson is still playing Amulet forever. And Harlan Fear with in 10th place of one of them with a Teamer Murktide deck, which is just Tarmogoyfs in the Murktide deck, which I think we see some offshoots of that we'll get to in a few seconds in the challenge results this weekend. But I think Teamer might be making a comeback.
I don't know if it's that or if it's just Harlan really enjoys the card Tarmogoyf, because he was playing that in his Legacy Delver deck as well, which not something you very often see these days. But I mean, Tarmogoyf is a drug. I get it. And some people just can't quit it.
Okay, that's fair. I think it's still acceptable, but I also respect that some of it may just be trying to recapture nostalgia. He
did actually identify that the theoretical reason for the green splash, at least, was Goyf patching up a lot of holes in the deck with regard to its overall threat density, and then Veil of Summer in the sideboard specifically as a counter to Shadow, where if you can assemble, Murktide plus Veil there, or even Goyf plus Veil there, that can easily be the 1-2 punch that puts the game away in a matchup where I've seen debate over which side is favored, but I think anything that can swing it is worth a look.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic Delvery matchup in any format where everyone thinks that they're, 55%, but really everyone is just like flipping coins and getting each other with their one sideboard deck card. So none of this surprises me.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we will log on here very shortly after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. If you want to buy Magic the Gathering cards, we have you covered. But if you want to sell them, that's never been easier too. With a 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry, there's no reason to sell anywhere else. Go to starcitygames.com/sell and pick one of 4 convenient ways to sell your cards to us. You can use our buy list, you can ship your cards to us, you can come to us in person in Roanoke, Virginia, and if you have an entire inventory that you want to offload, we can come to you. Go to starcitygames.com/sell for more information. All right, so let's dive into some of the online results that took place with Kamigawa, crucially, over the weekend. We have the usual pair of challenges, and then also a modern set championship qualifier, I believe the official nomenclature is. So let's start with the challenges, I suppose. So the Saturday challenge, we see a lot of Hammer, and that trend is not going anywhere. People thought the Hammer might be, and I don't want to say we had announced the death of Hammer or anything, but we had noted it was on the decline, and we thought that Boseiju might be another contributing factor to that, where that's going to be another difficult thing to recover from. And yet this weekend we saw a lot of Boseiju, and yet even more Hammer than we've seen in quite a while.
It does seem like the Hammer, like the default Hammer deck, even without an Edelcyst, has gained a lot from the reconfigure equipment. There was a lot of Lion Sash and a lot of the reality chip going around this weekend.
Yeah, Lion Sash, I've seen some debate over how good that actually is, about whether, you even want that card in your main deck, or some people saying you do, but it's probably the weakest card. But the reality chip is the one that really excites people, and this is a thing, dragging the deck into blue. Although one of the blue Hammer lists that did well is Happy Sandwich, who I think this is their 3rd consecutive Modern Challenge top 8 with Blue Eye Hammer, and last weekend, Kamigawa wasn't legal. This was just a small splash for the Lavinia and the Spell Pierces and so on. And so if you've decided this is already something you wanted to do, then getting to free roll an attempt at this exciting new equipment, that's a really nice pickup there.
Yeah, and you are correct. They have finished 7th, 2nd, and 2nd in 3 of the last 4 challenges. So that is a nice little run there with some Blue Hammer.
Yeah, always a bridesmaid, but they'll take it, I suppose. And hopefully they can pick up that W before too long. And then for, I guess, should we just get the general Hammer topic out of the way here? Because if we have to list all of the individual copies of Hammer in each of these events, and it's going to take us quite a while.
Yeah, we can just say Hammer is good. Hammer remains good. It took a weekend off. It's back again. And we can just kind of mention that, like, is there really anything going on too crazy with most of these Hammer lists? It's just like a card or two different. No one is like dropping Luris this weekend or anything. They're just playing Hammer with maybe a Lion Sash, maybe not, maybe an Iganjo, maybe not. The new Iganjo specifically, not necessarily the old one that only protects Luris.
Or both.
And oh yeah, I have heard arguments that is an unnecessary liability against Blood Moon. But I think that's more for the mono white list. I think these splash lists might just kind of have to accept their fate.
Yeah, I think if you want to play one or the other, then the new Iganjo is fairly better by a substantial margin. But if you can find room for both, then just the aesthetics of that, more so than anything else, is pretty pleasing to me. Let's move on from Hammer then, because the rest of this top 8 on the Saturday, it was some new cards, but also a lot of old decks that we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you want to talk about Amulet first, or should we leave that for later?
We can talk about Amulet in just a little bit. That won't be our last chance to do that. Let's talk about Heliod, because Juju Bean, one of the Heliod fans from back in the day, decided that they hadn't had their fill of that just yet, and missed the whatever rush that deck gives to some people, I suppose, and managed to take that all the way to the top 8 here. The only new card being a single copy of Boseiju, and they did actually post a screenshot of an opening hand that had Boseiju as its only green source, along with a pair of Utopia Spools. So not exactly free in this deck. There is certainly a trade-off there and a risk that you accept. But hey, if your creature combo deck gets to play a copy of this card, then why not?
Yeah, I mean, there's literally nothing new here. This is otherwise exactly the same Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl Heliod list from forever ago that probably still has the same issues with Ragavan because it doesn't have interaction and doesn't have one drops that block it well. It's the actual combo itself is nice, powerful, resilient, but I don't think that's necessarily what Modern's about right now.
Yeah, I don't know why I turned into this Heliod hipster where I had no interest in playing the deck during the period where it was quite definitively the best deck. And then as soon as it started slipping into unplayability, for some reason, all I wanted to do was try Heliod and then just get burned by that and not ever learn my lesson permanently.
It's fine. You can live vicariously through the Zoomers attempting to top 8 events with it.
It is too free for the bean, as it turns out, even when it comes to Heliod. For the rest of this top 8, we have Diablo XSC, Mark Tobias in 8th here with his recent take on the Underworld Breach deck with Dragon's Channeler and Ragavan and so on. And this is a shell which in some form or another he's been working on for over a year now, and I do miss those streams of his just putting a bunch of new cards in this deck and seeing what would happen, and occasionally cracking into a top 8 here and there. This latest take is kind of wild. We've got a single Oxyvagonus in the deck. We've got some Seasoned Pyromancers going on. We have things like one Chromatic Star, which on the surface look like, oh, that's a situational Ursa Saga bullet, until you realize there are no Ursa Sagas in the deck. We've moved past that approach for the time being. We do have a Den of the Bugbear, which is kind of interesting. I guess if you have to go on this scrappy beatdown plan, then that can help you out there.
Yeah, I actually really like that part of the deck. I think the issue with a lot of the old lists is that they were like, their fair plan was trying to be this like junky control deck, and they just kind of got shredded by the other fair decks. Like, you're just like, oh, I'm going to Emery back Engineered Explosives. And then like you look down at your opponent's board and they're playing John Saga and they've got like a 1, a 2, and a 3 and have killed all your creatures. Or a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 0. Sorry, I forgot about the Construct token to go with the Luris. And I think that adding Seasoned Pyromancer is a step in the right direction to solving those issues as opposed to, the hammer issue that you might have been trying to solve in that era.
Yeah, I've always really wanted to like this deck, but in my experience, it's been a bad combo deck with a bad creature backup plan, and often, even if you wrong foot the opponent where they have a bunch of removal spells, but you're on the breach side of things, or vice versa, they don't have their removal, and you're this Channeler Ragavan beatdown deck, you're still not allowed to win the game. You still have to show your work and actually finish the job, and that's easier said than done sometimes. So I remain a little skeptical here, especially in a Boseiju world. The fact that Boseiju cleanly answers Underworld Breach, which previously it was very difficult for someone to answer an enchantment on their opponent's turn in most contexts in Modern. Boseiju makes that a lot easier, and for those lists that were going bigger with stuff like Teferi Time Raveler, the fact that Boseiju kills Underworld Breach even through Teferi is a mark against those builds more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that also like points to some of the things that are going on with this specific list where like you are scaling down on lands and trying to be a leaner deck as opposed to, again, like this control deck with Teferis and explosives. Just like, we're not going to try and mess around if our opponent's disrupting us. We're just going to, like, if they try to disrupt the combo, just go straight for their face with the right creatures. If they are trying to fight us on other axis, then we have this combo to KO.
Speaking of combo decks that might struggle with Boseiju, talk to me about Belcher.
Yeah, deck's fine. I don't really understand what Bob49's latest development of March of Red. I don't actually know the full name. March of Reckless Joy. I don't really understand what that's doing. It feels like a weirdo desperation way to dig for a Belcher in a deck that, like, I don't know. I feel like you use a lot of your cards all the time, and it doesn't feel like it's part of any of the combo kills as far as I can tell. So maybe they're just trying stuff. I don't really have a good answer there.
Yeah, I believe their verdict was the new card was fine, in their words. I think it does a few things here. So the first is that because of the unique DFC setup, you just have a bunch of cards in your hand at all times that are technically red. And so this is why Fury was a common sideboard card here. Same thing goes for stuff like Force of Vigor. You just have a high enough density for those effects without even trying. The marches are a bit different, and especially the red march, where you really want to have a lot of excess red cards that you can pitch to it and tear through your deck. And this deck does have that. And you can imagine if you draw a redundant land, in air quotes, I suppose, or another Desperate Ritual that you don't need, for example, then this lets you just dig 2 cards deeper, find what you actually do need. And then I do wonder if there is some kind of across the paths pile where, let's say, Reforged Soul is unreliable in the face of Teferi, for example, whereas March maybe that unlocks 2 particular cards and then those chain you into more cards. Haven't quite worked out the specifics there, but maybe it opens up some unique line.
Yeah, I was trying to think that through, and it takes a lot of mana, I think, because the real issue is that and this is my issue with the card in general, is that your mana is all very 1-for-1. You have Ironcrag Feet, but besides that, you don't have a Seething Song or anything. So you have to invest a lot of individual cards into going off, and this is eating into that margin. Can we talk about? Well, let's see if that's a combo deck. Is Humans now a combo deck? Because there's a Humans deck in 7th place of this event with a card that I don't think either of us saw coming.
Yeah, and we do see Secluded Courtyard in this deck, so that one was a fairly easy one to bet on, just edging out those Ancient Ziggurats, which don't cast your Ether Vials or your Dismember sometimes. The one card I definitely did not expect to see in Humans, because I wasn't aware that it even existed, was Uprising Renegade.
Yeah, I forgot it was a human. I guess I don't do the constant human search, but Uprising Renegade is a Kamigawa card. It is 1 and a red for a 1/3 human something, probably samurai.
Yeah.
But it is it gets +2/+0 for each modified creature you control. And you may notice that modify counts counters, and that means that when you cast Thalia's Lieutenant, your opponent takes 8 billion damage.
Yeah, so even just the curve of turn 1 Champion of the Parish into turn 2 this is now a 3/3 because it has helped Champion to get a counter and become a 2/2. And then, as you mentioned, sometimes you truly go off with this and Thalia's Lieutenant. So I guess some Goblin Power Driver vibes from this one, sort of.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. It is other creatures that are modified. So yeah, I guess it's just Human Pile Driver, which is really funny because Goblin Pile Driver isn't even good in Modern, but that may just be a factor of the goblins more than anything else. You'll also notice that there are 3 Imperial Recruiters in this deck because of how important it is to get those counters when you are going down the road of Uprising Renegading people. So you will probably be Imperial recruiting for Thalia's Lieutenant a fair amount. There's not even a real toolbox. It's just there's an Abzan Valkner and a Turok and then all your normal human stuff.
Yeah, you have the Falconer to combo with your Thalia's Lieutenant. So yeah, I guess this is just a Thalia's Lieutenant combo deck, which is kind of neat. The one Turok, at least in the main deck, there's a second copy in the sideboard. I do want to draw attention to that too, because the 4-color deck, you can imagine being a very difficult matchup. It's just a pile of Solitudes and Furies and Prismatic Endings, and we've seen other decks successfully turn to Turok as an answer there. In this deck, Turok is a human, first of all, that is findable with your recruiters, so you have fairly consistent access to that card. And then, even with the 5-color Rainbow Mana base in the past, you could imagine triple black actually being a tough ask, because you have your Noble Hierarchs, which don't make black, and sometimes you have a basic plains or some of the canopy lands sneaking in there. In this list, you have 4 Cavern, 4 Territory, 4 Courtyard, so the 12 tribal lands. We still have the 1 Ancient Ziggurat, and then we have 4 Silent Clearing as well. So you can actually kick this thing fairly reliably. You're not taking too many chances with that one.
Yeah, you have to draw, 2 specific lands out of your 19 for that to happen. That's pretty low odds.
I think just drawing 4 lands in your 19-land deck might be a bigger hurdle than actually casting this card once you get there.
That's very true. Yeah, this is the first Humans list that I kind of have respect for, because it actually ups the ante on what the Humans decks were doing before with the Upriser combo starts.
Yeah, I do think as well that if some of the generic cheap removal has faded from popularity in favor of stuff which is very specifically good against Hammer, for example, or weird niche stuff which isn't that good against creatures but does line up very well against Shadow or Ragavan or whatever, then just old-fashioned 2017 humans with a few 2019 and 2021 cards for good measure might actually be a smart pick there.
Yeah, well, I also think that you mentioned 4-color being the Fury deck. There's not a lot of 4-color on Magic Online, and Fury is one of the 2 cards that cause problems for this deck. So I think that is a fairly large improvement. Now, the other card is Ursa Saga, which is like still pretty big player. We did mention that Hammer is just kind of like doing its thing, beating people up. So I don't think that you're like fully in the clear to humans, but it's looking a little better than it did when the deck last top 8'd, which still boggles my mind.
The other thing there too is that against 4-color, you have your Turak plan, which helps there. You have the one Magus of the Moon, which actually is pretty nice against 4-color, and also Ursa Saga for good measure, and also against your deck. But hey, you'll have Ether Vial or something. You'll figure it out. I guess that actually is one area where Uprising Renegade helps too, because it's just a threat you can cast with red mana. So I guess that's another point in its favor. But the current builds of 4-color, taking their cue from Canis's recent success, you would much rather play against the Ragavan Memory Deluge style of 4-color than the Fury Ephemerate style of 4-color, which has really fallen out of vogue in the past few weeks.
While that is true, I still don't like your position against Ragavan on the draw with this deck. It's just like they want to kill your creature anyways, so like they just play Ragavan, and if they kill your creature, things get really bad for you. It's just like they just get super rewarded for doing the thing they wanted to do anyways in a way that is really not something you can contest, which may be part of the reason why Brett and Force Sender are showing up in the sideboard.
Anything else from Saturday before we move on from that?
Let's see. I think something that is getting saved for a little later, and then just a very quick, a couple things that are getting saved for later, actually. Quick shout outs to mono red lists. Reinforced Ronin showing up in Burn. Not entirely sure about that, but it's kind of cool. And then shout out to mono red Prison Shenaniganer Fluffy Wolf showing up in these results with a Luca sideboard. You just kind of, the thing that I thought was kind of ingenious was you could swap out the Furies for Lucas when the removal isn't important, but a combo kill would be. And that is how you set up the Emrakul with like all your 3-drops. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, Fluffy Wolf, as friendly as you can be, in my experience, while trying to make your opponent's lives miserable with Blood Moons and Ensnaring Bridges and so on. So I guess nice to have a good sense of humor going on while you're trying to inflict that upon your opponents. I guess one other thing just to touch on here from Saturday is the Spider Space affinity list that we see in 10th, and then I think also Doomwake in this challenge down in 14th. So this is basically 8 Stringleaf Drums and 8 Memnites, and then 8 Thought Monsters, Thoughtcast, and then you just fill out the deck from there, I suppose.
Yeah, I kind of want to have a deeper discussion of this as we kind of round out the results, because I have some like opinions on this deck and where it might need to go in the future. But I think that it has some things going for it when stuff lines up, but it's also got some weird stuff that kind of happens when you like watch the games. And I think it does need some rebuilds, but it like there's some good stuff somewhere at the core, but it's not quite there yet. There was also a list in 27th, I believe, that showed up with a card that has basically won everything in Pauper, from what I can tell, but it had Synthesizer. 31st place with Experimental Synthesizer, showing up with that in like just true Urza. And I don't think that is the right card for like a true Urza deck, because those are a little clunkier. But I do wonder if that is the right card for the Affinity deck moving forward.
Yeah, so that Pauper Affinity deck is really cool these days. So you have a bunch of the Chromatic Star Synthesizer style effects, along with 8 Deadly Disputes, essentially. You have Dispute Yourself, which is one of the best cards in the format. And then also, I forget the name of the other one, but it's 1 in a black, you sack an artifact or a creature, you draw 2 cards, and you gain life equal to the sacrifice permanent's mana value. So you can imagine pairing that with stuff like Moon Enforcer in that format, just gaining 7 in response to a removal spell, drawing 2 cards. Not quite getting up to that here, but that shell of a bunch of these 1-drops that pay you off for sacrificing them, as we've seen be used to such good effect in decks like KCI, along with Synthesizer joining that roster now, Deadly Dispute. It feels like, again, there should be something in that space, but I'm not sure who's going to figure that one out.
Yeah, I believe the artifact sacrifice card you're talking about is Reckoner's Bargain. I've been drafting a lot of Neon Dynasty, so I actually know these cards.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was even a new card or if it was one that had just laid under the radar or flown under the radar for a little bit, but good to see that one bringing up the quite substantial number, honestly, of Kamigawa cards making a dent here.
Yeah, I actually think that people were previously playing. There's one of those Costly Plunder from one of the Ixalan sets that just literally doesn't gain life and does the same thing. So it's just a strict upgrade. Moving along to Sunday's challenge, we've got some stuff going on here. Big shout out to Javier Dominguez, just kind of like coming in cold with hammer and just bonking everyone to a victory. But also big shout out to Scipios in fourth place with a different style of Teamer tempo deck.
Yeah, so this is the Slogurk deck that we tried to manifest during that card's preview season. And it's being paired here with Seismic Assault. So you have the build your own loop there where you're discarding cards to Seismic Assault. Those put counters on Slogurk. You can then bounce a Slogurk, get those lands back, and then recast Slogurk and repeat from there. Lock your opponent out that way. You can also build other locks here with Renin 6 or the Life in the Loam, where, you know, that with Seismic Assault kind of writes itself. And then this is a perfect home for the recursive Boseiju idea that has been touted with that card. So you have 3 distinct ways in this deck to get Boseiju back to your hand for another go here.
Yeah, this mana base, I guess, can cast Seismic Assault fairly easily, but also like, I don't know. I think you have to be like very, very thoughtful about what you're doing. And maybe these Ragavan treasures are really working overtime.
I imagine that's the case, yeah. And there are only so many copies of Boseiju you can put in your deck before Seismic Assault itself starts to look only remotely castable. It would not surprise me if this shell is actually very good, but the thing that takes it to the next level is just cutting the Seismic Assaults and filling out the deck with the 4th Expressive Iteration, for example, or another Unholy Heat, another generically good card printed in the last calendar year, and that might take the deck over the top. But the Slogurk angle, I think, is very much worth exploring, and that, I think, is one big reason to take we mentioned the Gruul Saga deck from a few weeks ago. Porting that into blue, I think, Iteration, of course, is a really big pickup, but Slogurk as well. If you can get Slogurk going, that card is phenomenal. This gigantic threat, and if it ever gets removed, you get so much back from it. And then also, sometimes it doesn't even have to get removed. You just manually get that stuff back and then recast Slogurk. That is a great endgame by itself, and I think that this shell for it with the Channelers and the Ragavans and the Heats that we've all seen before, that's the perfect support that it needs.
Yeah, the 2 Life from the Loam in this like 23 land deck really just like brings me back to some like mid 2000s deck building.
Oh yeah.
There is another throwback coming in second place in this event. We've got, let's see, I'm just going to list cards and then we'll get to the punchline later. We got Mishra's Bauble, Unholy Heat, Thought Scour, Spell Pierce, Lightning Bolt, Counterspell, Serum Vision's Expressive Iteration, Murktide Regent, Dragon Rage Channeler, 0 Ragavan, and 4 Delver of Secrets.
Yeah, so I was wondering if the throwback here was the card Delver of Secrets or the player here, Danga, who a username I vaguely remembered from tournament reports from Magic Online like a decade ago. I saw it listed on the Bamzing write-up on Reddit as Carlos Morale, which would make a lot of sense. So that's another name which I remember from those days but hadn't put 2 and 2 together there.
Yeah, I have not confirmed that, but that seems to be what everyone is saying. And yeah, that is also part of the throwback. I know Mengu played this deck and had some funny things to say about the interactions between Mishra's Bauble and Delver of Secrets. So specifically what happens is you get to stack the triggers. So like you activate Bubble on their end step after playing Delver. And then if your top card is an instant, you stack it so Delver resolves first. And if your top card isn't an instant, you stack it so the Bauble just resolves first. You draw a card and you get like a fresh peek at something. So that's kind of absolutely adorable and not something that I don't think anyone has ever put those 2 cards in the same modern deck before.
Am I crazy for not thinking that this approach is crazy?
I mean, I think that 0 Ragavan is I cannot get behind that. I don't think that your deck is like fundamentally stable if you're trying to say Ragavan is bad, but like, I don't know. Talk me into it. Tell me why you think that Delver Secrets with 26 spells and no way to fix the top of your library reliably is good.
I'm not saying that the card Delver Secrets is good, but I think that the Ragavan skepticism maybe makes a little more sense. So if the idea, and don't know what Danka is really thinking here, but the justification that occurs to me is with all of these Channeler Ragavan Heat decks, you will get into situations where Ragavan is either your worst threat in the matchup, so I'm thinking of something like Yawgmoth, for example, or any deck that can really gum up the ground, or situations in matchups where it's meant to be good, where the card is very hit or miss. The card gets so much worse on the draw versus the play, for example. Sometimes you draw multiple copies where if those were Delvers, to use that direct comparison, then sometimes turn 1 Delver, turn 2 Delver, if both of them transform, that is a formidable air force in its own right, versus turn 1 Ragavan that gets broke on the ground with another Ragavan stuck in your hand is a recipe for disaster. So if the idea is just minimizing the variance that's inherent in that card, you miss out on some of those games where you play a turn 1 Ragavan and you defend it and it snowballs out of control by itself. But if you think those games don't occur often enough to incur those risks, and you would rather have the threat which, I mean, anything which relies on transforming the way Delver does has its own type of variance built into it. But maybe you think that one is easy to manage. I don't know.
I just really want to go back to the top where you're like, well, Ragavan is really hit or miss. Let's talk about Delver secrets, the literal hit or miss. But I guess I understand part of that. I am just sort of wondering why, I don't know. I don't know if Delver, you had mentioned, some of the land stuff, is that even better than Splashing Reclaimer or Tarmogoyf? I think if you're going to hedge your Ragavan skepticism, I don't think Delver is the correct way to approach it. I think you want to think about I don't know, maybe just hedging your Ragavan skepticism is playing Death Shadow, because that deck does that.
I think Delver itself is also a weak link there, but it would not shock me if some deck with 4 Channeler, 4 Sprite Dragon, 4 Murktide Regent, and a Brazen Borrow or something top 8 at a challenge in the not too distant future.
That's totally fair. Skimming down this top 8, it looks like a lot of stuff from almost a year ago, where it's just hammer, hammer, Cascade deck, hammer. Bob 49 showing up with the Belcher list with marches that we are still unsure exactly whether they're good or not.
I also on Bob 49's finish here, the obvious question is, was Beseju not as much of a problem as advertised? And his response was, I went 6-1 in the Swiss, losing to a red-green deck with Beseju and Renner 6. And then in the top 8, I lost to the same player, looping Renner 6 and Beseju. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad answer to that question, but that tells you all the information you need.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you expect to see Boseiju. If it's out of the Jund Saga deck, is that already a kind of dicey matchup that's getting a little worse? I don't know if that's real percentage loss, but if you're starting to lose percentage against the 4-color decks of that, then yeah, that is a big issue.
Yeah, I think I wonder if the strength of those loops with Ren and Beseju is what drags you away from Jund Saga into those straight red-green lists, for example, where I think you can fit exactly one Beseju into the stock Jund Saga Van list. Maybe the second if you're willing to replace an actual spell with that card rather than a land. I don't know if you can really go much above that. Whereas if you are in straight red-green, for example, or maybe there's a list which is Jund with Ren and 6 but no Saga, for example. Maybe that's how you fudge the mana base to make that work.
Well, I think we'll get to some of that in the league results later, because some people have been trying some stuff in that realm. I kind of want to jump down to 11th place past Nassif with stock sort of ephemerate-ish, but no ephemerates. All right, it's the Ragavan list. I missed that in the list. Just 4-color. And the Vengevine deck showing up again to talk about the Hogpog Sacrifice deck, because this is the first appearance of it, in addition to a top 16 in the PTQ. This is Bloodghast, Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, Stitcher Supplier, Ravenous Squirrel, Ragavan Kroxa. You'll notice I said no expensive cards because it's a Lurrus deck. So it's just a very Lurrus-y Goblin Bombardment Sacrifice deck, very reminiscent of something Sam Black would play 7 to 8 years ago.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about this approach to me is I saw the development of this deck live on stream as it was being kind of brainstormed and put together. And this started life as a food deck, essentially, as Cat Oven. We want to be an Ursa Saga deck because if you can be, then you probably should be. And we ended up going into effectively Rakdos just with a very light touch of green so that we can activate Ravenous Squirrel, but no Gilded Goose, none of the other food-centric stuff that we've seen define these shells in other formats. And so with that in mind, the actual Cat Oven combo looks somewhat inconsistent because you don't have many ways to find either piece, and then also there's no backup source of food for your Cauldron Familiar, so sometimes you're going to draw one without the other, and it won't be that impressive. In this deck, though, you have Ursa Saga, which can find Witch's Oven, and that's a high-impact thing to find with your third chapter. And then for Cauldron Familiar, sometimes you just mill that one over with Citrus Supplier, for example, and if you're tearing through your deck and milling it over that way, then you will find one before too long.
Yeah, I also found that the 4-color decks actually have a very, very hard time defeating Bloodghast plus Witch's Oven unless they have exactly Omnath. You're supposed to prismatic ending your way out of the situation, and that just you can't. What are you gonna do? You're gonna kill the oven and the Bloodghast with 2 prismatic endings in your 80 card deck? Not gonna happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do like that this tries to be a Kroxa deck, bearing in mind that you are also a Saga deck. So I don't know quite how easy black, red is to escape most of the time, but I do wonder if this could also be a Turok deck out of the sideboard, where if you think that you can get to roughly that configuration of mana often enough, you're also a Lurrus deck, so it's still compatible with that, and you can recur it with that sometimes, then if you think you need the help there, which, again, I don't know if you do exactly, then I think that's a good place to look.
Yeah, I'll also point to the fact that there's 24 lands in this deck. This is just treating Ursa Saga as a straight up spell. So the Kroxa thing and the Turok thing, I think, make a lot more sense when you're already leaning that way on the mana base.
Yeah, so an interesting shell. Excited to see where it goes from here. Hogbog, not someone who I think has had much reason to dive into Modern recently, but hopefully she sticks around and we see more development there. Anything else from the Sunday challenge?
No, this one is a little more stock all the way down. A little less kind of I think people got their thought monitors out the first day and then decided that if they were going to play again, they were going to try something else, or maybe thought monitor just put them off of doing anything the next day. It's hard to tell. Maybe this was Super Bowl Sunday, so no one in America wanted to wake up at 5 a.m. or whenever this thing starts in order to play it and then stay up until midnight watching. Yeah, anyways, I don't have a great reason why there's less nonsense on Sunday this week, but I guess I will just blame the Super Bowl and go from there.
Yeah, well, we need someone to do an in-depth sociological study of the week-to-week fluctuations of the Sunday Modern Challenge. I think that would make for some interesting reading.
Yeah, I know, because there was a long period of time where it was just the nonsense challenge, and then it just kind of flipped the other way around, and you may just be able to point to specific streamers' numbers just to oh yeah, well, this person top 32s because they play well, but they also just play absolute nonsense every single week.
Mm-hmm. So you can all ponder the reasons for why that might be as we take another short break before coming back for the final set of results here.
This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, your first stop for Magic the Gathering inspired stylings. Visit coalesceapparel.shop to pick up a t-shirt inspired by fan favorite Magic personalities, a hoodie from your favorite guild in the Ravnica University line, or just signal your intent to snap Keep in the Dark with an anti-Mulligan Mulligan Club sticker. Want a splash of a commander deck? Check out the Keep in 100 sticker line and see if your favorite commander shows up there. Whatever you order, use code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your purchase at coalesceapparel.shop. Coalesce Apparel. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Okay, so let's get into the PTQ that also happened on Magic Online this past weekend. And this was won by Pun Then Wine, a name that is very familiar to any Amulet Titan aficionado, and also to anyone who has just followed the Magic Online Modern results over the past however long it's been. And he won with what I guess I would call Quad Laser Amulet. This is just a very bold statement about the deck in the form of, I think these cards are good. I'm going to play 4 copies of all of them and come at me. Yeah,
it looks like there's slightly less lands than normal, just 30, until you realize that there's 4 pay 3 life forests in the Turn Timber Symbiosises. I guess that is one of the cards that it's being made the loudest statement about in this deck, just because it's not necessarily in most of the other lists.
Yeah, so I think the idea behind this approach is Turn Timber Symbiosis is one of the best approaches you can go to against Grixis Shadow, where it's another threat, so you just have redundancy there, and it's a threat which is it's fairly immune to Drown in the Lock, it's immune to Inquisition of Kozilek, and then even against Thoughtseize, which is meant to be the universal proactive answer there, you can park it in play and then eventually pick it up with a bounce land when you're good to go. And so building the deck around that as one of your secondary threats makes a lot of sense. If all you're trying to do is maximize your redundancy in the face of disruption, the issue then becomes, though, your odds with that card are not great if all you're hoping to do is hit a Titan, especially if you drew a Titan already and it got discarded or something like that. And so one way to address that problem is just Cultivator Colossus. And so this is an approach that we saw in the first week or two of Crimson Vow when people were really leaning heavily on Colossus and trying to explore the potential of that card. I think for the most part, people have cooled a little bit on it, but I think that you almost always see the first copy showing up in these non-Khan lists, sometimes even with Khan. And then once you have 4 Turn Timber Symbiosis, the second copy makes a lot of sense. And then I think a crucial part of that recipe is the endurances in the sideboard, where not just a phenomenal card against any graveyard deck, obviously, and you're always going to have the first there as a Summoner's Pact target, but it's not just a good card against Shadow, but it's also a good Symbiosis hit almost against Shadow too, where you can't rely on Colossus against them, and that's one of the reasons why that card fell out of favor a little bit. It's just so bad in the face of Dress Down. But Endurance as 3 mana for a good effect. There's also off Symbiosis is 7 mana for a 6/7, because Symbiosis adds the 3 counters if it has a mana value 3 or less. And the same thing works with Dryad as well. So if you can make an X7, essentially, that has some other good impact, well, that card is now immune to Unholy Heat. And if it's doing something else good for you as well, then that card now becomes a pretty substantial threat. And so you almost get to pivot into this very weird Ram deck where you just have a ton of good threats, and then also some of that nut draw potential that the deck is well known for.
Are you ever sideboarding in the Kozilek to hit with Turn Timber Symbiosis? Or is that just... you talked about one of the sideboard creatures. You kind of just left the other one hanging.
Yeah, I think that is mostly an anti-mill tool, which you can board in against like a blue-white or 4-color or something. It's not actually a great card to hit off Symbiosis because you don't get the cast trigger with the way that those Eldrazi's are worded. So you just flop a 10/10 into play and hope that it doesn't get solituded or something, which is easier said than done. But for the most part, I think that approach makes a lot of sense, but it does also come with these steep deck building costs where, the land slots there was such stiff competition for those even before Boseiju was printed. And now, if you want the 4 copies of Boseiju that Punt Then Wine is playing, then on top of the 4 Turn Timber Symbiosis, you do have to make a lot of sacrifices elsewhere. But this is it's a good proof of concept for how extreme an approach you can take. I think ultimately, even if you follow through with this list, you're not going to end up with 4 Symbiosis or 4 Boseiju or 4 Caverns and them all being in the sideboard, or all 4 Force of Vigors at the end of the day. But as an initial sketch for what's possible, I think this is a really fun thing to see. Yeah,
I really like the kind of duality of Boseiju and Cavern, because most of the things you want to Cavern against are things that you don't necessarily want to Boseiju against. The overlap is like, what exactly is it Murktide?
Well, there's this weird application for Boseiju against some of the blue decks now, where Cavern gets you past their counterspells, but they've increasingly moved to Dress Down, and Boseiju has this role against Dress Down where it can, with your own creature on the stack, remove the Dress Down that they played in response and let your Titan or your Colossus or what have you continue to do its thing. So they do actually support each other in this one very odd situation. But for the most part, you're right. If you're against a control deck, maybe you board down to the 1 Boseiju and then board some other stuff too. And now your 4 Caverns come in and those are going to do some great work for you.
Yeah, it seems like a really easy way to like fiddle with your mana base and counterbalance without really cutting into stuff like your Castle Garen break support, which is actually like relatively important in those matchups because you need to be able to threaten to do your thing at a specific rate to force them into a defensive position early enough to like give you time to cavern, it feels like.
So when we first saw Boseiju, the immediate reaction was, well, this card is going to be phenomenal in Amulet and also pretty good against Amulet at the same time. And Pun did say that he lost in the Swiss, but then got his revenge in the top 8 to one of the other exciting decks here. This is green-white Death and Taxes with Leonin Arbiter and 4 Boseiju in 80 cards. This is a Yorion deck as well. There's a lot going on here, but that specific 1-2 punch, I mean, Arbiter by itself is already a massive nuisance for this deck. Boseiju very good against it too. And that combination is good against basically everyone. Just turning your Boseiju into, Sinkhole, even if they have no good artifacts or enchantments for you to hit.
Yeah, I don't know. The classic Arbiter versus green creatures matchups just always play out that way. This deck is sort of a problem for Amulet. Like, it is a pain to deal with for Ghost Quarter, but I mean, Boseiju's not really extending much of the role beyond what Field of Ruin would show up in this deck. I do like the adorable, this is the double Igandra deck that you mentioned, showing up with one of each. Was this what you were planning all along?
So I guess in this deck you have Igandro Castle protecting your Thalia, which then means the Thalia can reduce the cost of your other Igandro to ambush their thing in combat, or hey, sometimes you can first strike their creature with Thalia, and then the Thalia is reducing the cost for your new Igandro. It's so perfect. It all comes together nicely.
Yeah, you've just built Unholy Heat. Very clearly, that is exactly the most powerful thing you can be doing.
Hey, look, if you insist on playing with white creatures, then you have to, find your own impressions of actually good cards somehow.
Yeah, I do like Archon of Emeria. I think that is a slightly underrated card, especially against the 4-color decks, just because those decks are so fetchland focused. I know I've been got by, I want to say it was Blood Sun when I was playing the 4-color deck, where like just shutting off the fetch lands is really problematic because a lot of the deck is like, even if you have 3 mana, you often need like 7 mana, and it's really hard to do that if you cannot activate your fetches. And Archon just like double slowing it down where it's the fetch land is tapped, then whenever you fetch is tapped. It's just really, really painful. So I think that card is has been underrated for the last few months. The problem is that every card around Archon is dicey.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that you should go out there and play Leonin Arbiter, but if you insist on doing that and no one can convince you otherwise, then I think this approach is one that's worth looking at. But returning to Amulet for just a second, if you will indulge me, Pun also did say that he was slicing through Hammer in this top 8, and we did wonder, what is the overall impact of Boseiju going to be on Hammer and its place in the format? And so you have this odd duality at play where Hammer is still seeing incredible success here in week 1 with Boseiju, but this specific matchup, I think, really flips in Amulet's favor with that new card, where I think it was close before and you could make it favored for Amulet if you wanted to put the work in there. But Boseiju really helps out there without even trying, and that's even before we get to the full 4 copies of Force of Vigor in the sideboard here, which I don't think you need all 4, but if you predict this much Hammer, if you have that prophecy, then why not? But one very common play pattern in the matchup is, let's say you have an Amulet and you can resolve a Titan, but you don't have any support for that. So you don't have a Dryad that's going to let you shoot down all of their things with Valakut triggers. You don't have a second Amulet to open up this one-turn kill with Stronghold or Sunhome or anything else. And so you have to find a way to survive the turn. And in the past, that was often easier said than done. Sometimes there wasn't a good way. You just had to cross your fingers and hope that they didn't have what they needed. With Boseiju in the mix, it actually becomes pretty trivial because you can still get the haste attack in, and then with the attack trigger, you can find, let's say, Bounce Land Boseiju. The Bounce Land picks up Boseiju and gives you the 2 mana to hold the Boseiju open. And that's happening in combat. So even if, let's say, they had Pure Steel Paladin, they put a hammer on something and then moved it back to make a massive blocker, well, they can't block and ambush your Titan easily because you still have the threat of Boseiju eating the hammer. And then once you get to pass the turn, they often are going to need a second or even a third hammer to actually finish the job there. So just the threat of Boseiju is something that always has to be on their radar. And then it opens up these specific sequences in the matchup where you feel this much greater degree of safety than you ever felt in the past.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, the 3 copies are really playing a highly important role there, as opposed to like if you just have one, you only get that first turn of safety, as opposed to like the follow-up Titan attack just being an absolute slam dunk, lock them out of the game. I mean, you might have like other lines where like you make other creatures, but it's just like so clean to just like have every every time that you attack with a Titan, you get a naturalize. Like that's just it. It's done. Like you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it's one of those matchups where whichever deck wins is often by exactly 1 turn. And so if you can delay the inevitable, it doesn't actually become inevitable anymore because you get to untap and then just do your thing and overwhelm them. So a really valuable addition to the roster there. And I don't know what the future for Amulet is. I don't know if this approach actually moves the needle too much in the Shadow matchup, for example, or I think other threats will emerge and other decks will adapt. But that Amulet resurgence that we saw briefly a few months ago, we may see something like that swing back around again. Outside of this top 8, if we look down to the top 16, there's this interesting other take on Underworld Breach with none of the grinding station stuff, which is kind of embarrassing outside of the combo context. This is very much just a fair, almost traditional Boros Prowess deck that has this backdoor kill via Underworld Breach.
Yeah. I think the other enchantments in this deck are just as interesting because there's 4 Blood Moon on top of the breaches and an Experimental Frenzy, which at least to me signals that like there's this assumption that like X% of the time your channelers and Ragavans are just going to run away with the game. But then like you got to finish somehow, and maybe Seasoned Pyromancer isn't quite cutting it in the format right now.
Yeah, the frenzy alongside the Underworld Breaches and so on is fascinating. I guess there's if you have those and Channeler, then you can like shuffle cards between zones in a way that's pretty favorable without them ever having to touch your hand.
Yeah, it's that is exceptionally weird setup there with Breach versus Frenzy, where you're just like, yeah, you can do both, but it's totally fine.
Frenzy feels like one of those cards which was very good in its standard format in like 2018, 2019, but surely they've printed 3 different better versions of that effect since then, but I'm not sure I could name them, so maybe they haven't, and I'm just imagining that.
Well, Experimental Frenzy does have a Modern Pro Tour Finals finish to its name, so you watch who you're talking about here. But I don't think that they have printed something that is like this. They've printed a million different versions of this, but none that are they've liked to restrict what they can cast for the most part, or like it's like the reality chip where you're gated by having a creature. I don't think there's one that's just like very cleanly just like Frenzy just lets you go off here with whatever you find.
Yeah, speaking of the reality chip, I know we've mentioned Hammer and the Blue Splash and Hammer, but I have seen some phenomenal screenshots involving the reality chip in that deck. Don't know how representative those are, and there are certainly a lot of cards where the ceiling is very high, but the base case is not that impressive, but it does seem like the reality chip is delivering on some of that early hype so far.
Yeah, it seems really powerful, and again, like, I'm a big fan of the fact that the baseline interaction is just you play a fetch land with the reality chip in play, and you've created a Mishra's Bauble Scry. So even if you're not like managing to equip it quite as efficiently as you could because they're going after your Sigarda's aids or whatever, the card is still putting in some value work. So I think that there's a lot of ground to cover with that card still. And actually kind of turning away from the PTQ to the league dump, we actually see a full 3 copies in let me look up the player's name that has basically been like one of the people who has just played Breach nonstop. I know you had mentioned, this is the player who I think has put up the most 5-0s most recently. It is, one second, Jiggy Wiggy. Yeah, there we go. That's the Magic Online name you should be looking for in the results if you want the latest Breach updates. And they have a full 3 copies of the reality chip in their deck.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen it show up in other places. There was a Jeskai Tendency deck in Pioneer that had that card. Just you attach that one to a Sylvan Caryatid, which is pretty difficult to interact with, and then you just go nuts from there. So very keen to see where else that card shows up. But if it is only in Hammer, then I think it can rest easy with that because it's doing some great work there so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to complain about being like a premier tutor target for one of the best decks in the format in terms of like a random standard equipment rare thing that showed up and did fine. Yeah, this set is having a pretty broad impact. Are we ready to move from the PTQ into the leagues and maybe circle back to a discussion of a couple cards or decks that we've already discussed?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So there's actually, I know this set we've said has had a pretty broad impact. There's like a lot of weirdly missing cards. Like I didn't see a Tameshi deck, which makes me very sad. I think that card's awesome. You can read what I wrote about it with regards to Amulet Tameshi.
I was going to say, I'm going to set you up for the plug here. Do you want to get into your own adventures with Tameshi briefly, even if they haven't shown up in this deck dump?
Yeah, well, I think that the two things that I kind of thought about doing with Tameshi are, so the baseline is what you discovered or pointed out in an article, which is that Artificer's Intuition is basically like a clean combo kill with Tameshi, where you end up in a spot where you like put Lotus Bloom in the graveyard, and then when you do that with Tameshi, you get to like pay a white and bounce a land to produce 3 mana of any color, which then sets you up to activate Intuition some more, and then play some Amulet of Vigors. And if you have 2 Amulet of Vigors and a Razortide Bridge in your hand or graveyard and a Razortide Bridge on the battlefield, you can like, it basically costs a white to bounce a bridge to recur a bridge, and then a blue to discard a bridge to Intuition to tutor for something. So you just like, if you have 2 amulets, you just make white blue each time, and you loop through and you get to put all the artifacts from all the intuitionable artifacts from your deck into your hand and like mill them out with Altar of the Brood. If you get a 3rd amulet in there, which is like very easy because you're tutoring, you actually get to the point where you're making infinite mana. You could kill them with a Walking Ballista at that point. So I think you can either approach that from like a very traditional artifact combo shell where you just are like Tameshi and Urza and like the combo stuff and some interaction because you're like more of a Splinter Twin deck in terms of speed and consistency. And I think I had Ragavan in my list. Or you can just be like, well, Amulet has played Amulet of Vigor, and Amulet has played Lotus Bloom, and Amulet has played Walking Ballista. So all I have to do is add Tameshi's and Artificer's Intuitions to my Amulet deck, and it's totally fine.
Yeah, specifically, it was Pun and Wine who played Lotus Bloom in Amulet back in the day. That was his unique point of divergence with the rest of the Amulet crowd. But yeah, I was going to clarify what you said by describing Artificer's Intuition, which is a very obscure card from one set 20 years ago as, oh, it's just survival of the fittest for artifacts that cost 1 or less, until I realized that there was a decent chunk of the audience out there who doesn't know what they mean, what that means. They have no frame of reference for survival either, which is a truly depressing and somewhat, feeling my age creep up on me as I say that. But yeah, the Tameshi Titan deck, I think, is, again, don't know if it's good, but it certainly sounds sweet and worth sinking hours of my life into. I know that I think their username is Davius Minimus, who actually was the first person I ever played against on Amulet in a paper event in like 2014, and that really opened my mind to what that deck was capable of. I know they've been messing around and posting some YouTube videos with a Tameshi Titan deck with some very impressive thumbnails enticing you in. So I think something there is... We will feature that in a 5-0 league dump nonsense of the week at some point. Don't know if it can really aim higher than that, but I dare to dream.
Yeah, Tameshi is just a really powerful card, and like you said, Artificer's Intuition. To finish off the text for everyone who hasn't seen this card, because it's people have been trying to break this card for literally 20 years, and it's finally happening. 1 blue enchantment, blue discard an artifact, search your deck for an artifact with mana value 1 or less, and put it into your hand. That's it. I think that the combo is just like really compact in terms of setup, and the cards they're not like generically like great cards on their own, but they're all things that you can utilize. And there is like an ability to create a interlocking deck where playing the combo is so low cost that like you just have this really powerful like extra aspect to leverage on top of whatever you're doing. In addition to the fact that like I think it's kind of undersold how good it is to just like cast Tameshi and do things with it. Like you can just pick up Ursa Saga with it from your graveyard, from the battlefield, to like make your construct, replay it, and just like keep chaining constructs every turn forever. The card is just like really good and going to beat people when it's not like a card that just sits there as like it's way better than like a Deceiver Exarch would be on the battlefield, is what I'm trying to say. So the combo is like very, very 22 where like all of your cards do something, your pieces generate value. It's relatively easy to just like put interaction into your deck too. It's just like really easy to build a good deck that uses that card.
Yeah, so you can do all of the convoluted infinite combo stuff. I think there probably is just a good fair home for Tameshi too, and maybe that does still involve Lotus Bloom, and maybe you're not making infinite mana, you're making finite mana, but if on turn 4, you're bouncing a bunch of lands to your hand, drawing a card in the process, making 9 or 10 mana net, you can figure it out from there, and that is kind of hand-waving things away, but I think that is almost the easy part, to find a good way to convert 9 mana or something in Modern. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader there. But yeah, I think you can find spots on the spectrum all the way from, I just put Tameshi in my somewhat traditional blue-white Ursa deck, all the way to, I'm building a Tameshi combo deck, which also has a lot of this flexibility built into it, because I think the overlap between Intuition and Ursa Saga is something that will jump out to a lot of people, but it's almost the things which Intuition does that Saga can't do, which are appealing in their own right. So part of that is setting up the combo in the first place, because Ursa Saga, I'm going to say thankfully, can't find Lotus Bloom. I think if it could, then this format would look very different already. So it sets that up for you. But even just stuff like Intuition finding Portable Hole as this very cheap, flexible answer, which as we had to remind people when the card was being spoiled, you cannot do that with Ursa Saga, or stuff like the new Moonsnare prototype, you can find that. There's lots of possibilities that card opens up, and then to the extent that they do overlap, well, now you have a good direct way to find your Ether Spell Bomb, your Pithing Needle, whatever it may be. It is worth issuing a correction here, because both of us, I don't know how this slipped past us and our editors on various platforms, and also most of the wider community here, but Tameshi does say non-creature permanent for stuff that's returned to hand, so you're not, getting 2 card draws out of an Ether Spell Bomb in every turn cycle with this. That's sadly not how that works.
Yeah, that is an unfortunate update. I want to add 2 cards to your list of Artificer's Intuition targets, though. Chalice of the Void and Engineered Explosives. I'm aware that Tameshing and Engineered Explosives is not as exciting as like Lurising it, but there is like a 0-drop like lockout there, and just like Intuition being in your deck represents a very sort of Teferi-like setup, where you just have like this 3 mana permanent that locks out the Cascade deck. So yeah, it is a relevant upgrade in terms of what it is actually finding.
Mm-hmm. So maybe let's move past our own nonsense here for the time being and get into the nonsense that the good people out there were showing up and performing well in the leagues with. What did you have first on the docket here?
Yeah, we'll go through some decks and we'll get back to a discussion we kind of left off there earlier. Discover the Impossible showed up in this dump, not with Cascade cards though. It was featured alongside Underworld Breach in just like a true Breach combo deck, where it is just playing the role of the like Peer Through Depths in Storm, except for just like cast the card on the spot, so you can discover into Manamorphose relatively easy. And it's not like as exciting as it sounds probably, but like in terms of like cashing out your value and like continuing down the chain, when all you really want to do in this deck is just put material in your graveyard for these fast breach starts. This is also a Pyromancer Ascension deck, so like again, it's finding you your double ups so that you actually have these huge combos. Even though there's like this silly Nambo stuff going on with Breach Ascension, you can pull off, actual kills with either. So it is sort of it's weirdly redundant in a way that is a Nambo, but like who cares, because whichever one you resolve is probably good enough.
It is adorable. Yeah. You can do things like you cast Strike at Rich to trigger the Ascension, and then you like cast another one, and then your Ascension is now fully online, which means your future Strike the Rich is like a netting mana. I guess, if you flush it back, you're then losing mana, but whatever. You can take game actions is the point here, and that's the ultimate goal. It is very fun to me to see a dedicated combo Breach deck that isn't fiddling around with any of this creature plus Mox Amber kind of stuff. This is, I am a spell-based combo deck. That is what I came here to do, and I'm going to try my best to do that. Again, don't know how successful that's going to be in general in the world of Prismatic Ending and so on, and certainly in the world of Boseiju. I think that just random enchantments that your whole deck is built around do lose out a decent amount there, but we're very excited to see something in this space show up and do well.
Yeah, I absolutely am always enthralled whenever an Is It combo deck does well, because they have really struggled this last year. I want to point out the next deck as an interesting upgrade and a bit of a like solution for a debate that I was kind of having in my head the whole time, which is this is a 7 liquid metal deck. It's 3 liquid metal coating and 4 liquid metal torque in the main deck, with the 8th being in the sideboard to Karn the Great Creator for specifically a coating there, because coating plus Karn is more powerful. But this is a 4 Boseiju, like Renin 6 Thieving Skydiver deck and Ancient Grudge, like the full on liquid metal combo deck that has kind of been set up since Modern Horizons 2. And I had this like sort of thought about Boseiju plus liquid metal coating where like I was like, well, what's the point? And I think the answer is actually what this deck has sort of hit on, which is that you traditionally want to do the liquid metal thing in a Gruul deck. And those decks tend to have relatively large issues against big creatures. And you can end up in a lot of spots where like the liquid metal Karn thing isn't good enough to solve that. And there's only so many Ancient Grudges you can play. Subsidizing your next artifact interaction spell for that part is really good, because who cares if you're going after their lands? Like, you are going to try to Boseiju their creatures, which again, at that point, liquid metal torque makes a lot of sense, because who cares if a non-land permanent is what you're destroying if that was your plan all along.
Yeah, this setup of fast Karn plus the liquid metal shatters thing, very, very good against any kind of slow deck. Obviously phenomenal against any deck that's already an artifact deck, but it's going to struggle against Death Shadow, Tarmogoyf, Maritide Region. And once you have enough redundancy on the good shatters as well as your good liquid metal, whatever it is, and you're just building your own Vindicates, you actually have enough answers to those problems that maybe something like this can still work.
Yeah, I think the key is just recognizing that you are not a land destruction deck. You are a solid control deck that is able to be a land destruction deck against the other control decks.
Yeah, I almost wonder if this deck would want something like its own Tarmogoyf or its own, I don't know, whatever the big threat would be. But to avoid this kind of a disjoint nature of needing A plus B for your deck to do anything, sometimes just Lightning Bolt into Tarmogoyf into other good thing might be enough to get the job done. So maybe that's just straight red-green. Maybe you don't need all of these shatters and Thieving Skydiver and the one Gorilla Shaman, which is the most adorable feature of this deck list. But I think that this has always been one of those kind of gimmicky decks, but I think it's less of a gimmick and more of a very obnoxious possibility now.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I think the Seasoned Pyromancers are trying to move in that direction, but I can see there being room for more of that. Next deck, I had mentioned that Archon, the creativity deck with Archon, has gotten a card. Hidetsugu Consumes All showed up in one of these decks, because once you're already adding the 5th color, the black mana to cast your Archons on occasion, you can pick that up. And interestingly, it is both interaction and a combo piece, because it is a non-creature that turns into a creature. Even if it's not the best threat, it is a creature that you can upconvert here.
I still could not tell you what the text on that creature is, but it doesn't matter. We're just turning that one into an Archon Cruelty, which I have to imagine is an upgrade, even though I'm not quite sure exactly by how much.
Yeah, I think the backside is like a 3/3, and then it has, that's it. It's just a 3/3. That's what I got. It grows. I don't know. It's a 3/3. You really just want to get rid of it. It's Dwarven Mine in like Engineered Explosives form. That's all you care about with this card. And I get that there's like a little bit of anti-synergy with Dwarven Mine, but like you can just play around your own cards pretty easily here. Just like, don't make a dwarf if you're gonna sweep the board. That doesn't make sense. So yeah, I thought
it'll be fine. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I also like that because I know that the Breach deck tends to have issues against like Shadow and similar decks where they are going like absolutely ham on your resources, and you're just like left with a bunch of disjoint stuff and lands. And having a broadly powerful card that is still somewhat synergistic is pretty important when you're trying to do that. And this card also, like, attacking all aspects of their plan really helps to level the playing field when you resolve it. So really makes sense there. I think the last thing I wanted to discuss is, what has your take been on the Urza decks that have kind of been the talk of the town? You know, we mentioned these 8 drum Urza decks showing up at the top of the episode because they were showing up in the challenge decks. I have been like unimpressed watching them. And I think that the fundamental disconnect is that if you look at like the affinity decks that were like opals and drums that are probably the closest analogy, they like really tried to not play 3-drops where possible. Like you played 2 Etch Champion and 2 Master of Ethereums usually at most. These decks just play so many cards that cost so much mana. You just end up in all these spots where like your cards are like Ornithopter, land, an uncastable Thought Monitor, and like 2 Urzas. And you're like, what does my deck even do?
Yeah, it's like you have this A plus B combo element to your deck where part A is the Ornithopter or the Memnite, part B is the Springleaf Drum or the Moonsnap Prototype. And if you get your combo together, it's not like you've accomplished anything. You haven't won the game on the spot. All that you've done is allow the rest of your deck to actually function properly. And then you still need that to do the work, to actually win the game by itself. And so even though, again, this is a good screenshot equity deck in the sense that, yeah, sometimes you'll play a turn 2 Urza or something, or you'll have a gigantic Ornithopter because of Nettlecyst, and the deck, when it's firing on all cylinders, looks very powerful. But the moment that it stops doing that, or that those cheap resources come under attack, the rest of the cards are so clunky and also not worth the payoff because they rely on those cheap things being around in the first place. So even if you struggle your way up to a Nettlecyst, for example, if your Nettlecyst is a 3/3 or a 4/4, that's just not a modern quality card. Or, how expensive does your Thoughtcast or Thought Monitor have to be for you to decide it's just not worth the trouble anymore? And so I have just fundamental reservations about these decks, and those haven't really changed. This is one of those spots, actually, where I don't know if you've seen the whole hubbub over one of these Commander set cards, Kappa Cannoneer.
Which card?
Oh, so this is from the Neon Dynasty Commander decks. It's 5 and a blue, improvise, ward 4. Whenever an artifact ETB is under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it becomes unblockable until end of turn. And it starts as a 4/4. Already it starts as a 5/5 because it triggers on itself for some reason. But anyway, so this is a card which has some obvious like legacy applications and so on, but it hasn't been officially released. It's only found in the treasure chests. And so its current going rate on Magic Online is like 100 tickets, and you just literally can't find them. They are inaccessible. No one has them for trade. No rental services, GoBots, nothing. And so there is, in theory, a good legacy deck with this card that exists, which just won't be playable for, let's say, the Mana Traders legacy thing this weekend because the cards just aren't there to do it. But that is the kind of effect which would make me interested if there's this thing which, whether it's improvise or affinity, some big thing which I don't even need my Ornithopters and Memnites to stick around too long for to do the work. But absent any of that, I continue to be skeptical about the show.
I feel like I listened to all that and I've walked away with like the Walter White Jesse meme where he's just like, what are you talking about? Yeah, Kappa Cannoneer. That is a card. I'm now tempted to open all my treasure chests on Magic Online, but I don't think that that's the right approach to this. I do think the right approach in Modern may be to hybridize all of these Springleaf Drums with Experimental Synthesizer and be a very, very low to the ground deck. I think that that's where you're going to get your leverage.
So that sounds like a good starting point to me. My issue there is if you fill your deck with so many, I assume, drums, synthesizers, Mishra's Baubles, maybe we on other zeros here like Welding Jar, stuff like that. Where does the action come from? Like we cycle through all of this air in our deck. We're digging 5 cards deep a turn. What are we hoping to dig for once we've cleared all of the chaff out of the way?
I think you have to stop after the drums and like the synthesizers in terms of like real air. I guess synthesizer. Oh my gosh. I'm not looking forward to saying that word if that card ever sees a lot of play. I think that card is like, it's not air, but like, I think that in general, once you put 8 Springleaf Drums in your deck, you really have to be careful about what other cards you put in. I mean, this was the classic issue with Affinity where like in any kind of attrition matchup, you would almost want to trim like a Mox Opal or like 2 Springleaf Drums or something where like, yeah, if you're just like stuck trading cards, that's not what you want to do. It's probable that Nettlecyst is still really good in this deck, but I don't think I could see any other 3-drops or 4-drops showing up.
Yeah, there was that deck that just snuck into, I think, 31st in the Saturday challenge, which was a much clunkier deck, actually. It was basically just old school Jeskai Ursa with Goblin Engineers and the Thought to Sword combo and so on. And it just had some things. It had some synthesizers. There we go. Perfect. And so in that shell, you can sacrifice your synthesizer later to your Thopter Foundry at a point where you can reliably cast whatever the card you get is on the way out. And then sometimes if you need just another 1-drop, you can kind of park it down there, cycle it. Or I guess it's also like a decent thing to sacrifice to your Goblin Engineer in the course of returning something else.
Yeah, I just, anytime you talk about like clunky with that card, so I guess the hidden thing there is that the card is okay with some amount of clunky cards. This is a draft lesson getting ported back to Modern, where I've actually enjoyed the combination of that card and Imperial Oath in draft, because for every time that you hit the card you can't cast, there's actually another time where you just hit lands to cast the thing. And after your like first use of the card, or really like second if you're looping it, you just have so much mana that you just don't even care at that point. So like it as just like divination is good with expensive cards makes some sense, but I think there's a limit to that.
You do actually have that Mishra's Bauble Delver of Secrets style thing going on here too, where if you bauble yourself and you see a card which you could play on the turn cycle, and that does include lands, then you're good to use it now, get that card, and you'll that's fine. That's a good rate. And if you can get another card on the way out, then that's all upside. And then if not, well, you probably have another decent way to spend your mana on this turn, and you can wait until you'll find a good spot to play a 1-drop some other time.
Yeah, actually, I think Ben Blywas has asked me this question about what does it take to pair Luris with Experimental Synthesizer. And I thought my answer was I need to search every single piece of artifact payoff to find the one that like actually makes sense in the format. But I think it probably makes a lot of sense in Pioneer. And I'm actually guessing that I have missed the update in Pioneer where like the Voldaren Epicure Blood Tithe Harvester deck is just like a Luris deck with Synthesizer in that format.
Yeah, I know Claudio, who was a constant Pioneer content creator, the guy who won every Pioneer challenge with 5-color Niv at a time when no one else cared about Pioneer. His latest kick is this like artifact heavy Rakdos sacrifice deck with a bunch of the blood cards and this and Deadly Disputes. And I don't know how cleanly that would port over to Modern, but you could interest me in like this Deadly Dispute, Luros, Ursa Saga. Like that's a fine starting point.
Yeah, and actually the thing that interests me here is that we already almost discussed a deck that wants Deadly Dispute, right? Like we've been talking about Mayhem Devil and Cat Oven. Like that is a natural home for Deadly Dispute, at which point like if you're a Luris deck there, like you could play Experimental Synthesizer with like ovens and cats and something else to sacrifice artifacts, and then like also Deadly Dispute there. So that may just be like the clean like overlap set there.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of any artifact set, which I think it's fair to lump Kamigawa in with that at this point. Just these like weird little cogs which are going to tie the room together somewhere, but you're not sure what that room is yet, and you have to do the work to figure that out.
Yeah, this set really just has a huge roster of impressive things. Like we haven't even seen a Greasefang deck in Modern, even though they are tearing up Historic and Pioneer. What other cards did we have listed? Like there's been a little bit of Tezzeret, but not a lot. This set is just like so many more cards deep than I think we even realize, because there are things we discussed that haven't been touched on, and then things that are being touched on that aren't being touched on that feel really obvious. Again, we had this very long discussion about Tameshi and like when is that card showing up?
Right. And then the cards which I think it would be safe to rank near the top for our top 5 segments or the podcast we did over the past few weeks. Like, yeah, okay, we know that Boseiju is going to show up. We know that at least the first Lion Sash in a Stoneforge deck, for example, will show up. But beneath that is a very deep bench. And the stuff at the top, it doesn't feel so much better than everything else that is crowding out the stuff below it. The way that, there's no like Oko, Uro, companion style nonsense going on here. It's just interesting cards from top to bottom. And that's, you really love to see that.
Yeah, there's actually one that I want to mention because I saw Maze Mind Tome in our list recently. And Reckoner Bankbuster might just be like a more interesting, proactive, aggressive version of that same effect. This is the 2-mana vehicle that's a 4/4 crew 3. It starts with 3 charge counters, and you can pay 2 and tap and remove one of them to draw a card, just like Tome. Except for when it runs out of those 3 charge counters, instead of life and everything, you keep the vehicle and you make a pilot that is a 1/1 that crews for 3, and a treasure token. So like you just get the full package of like a 4/4 that will start attacking soon. So I think that that's like a very interesting, if you are into Eldrazi Tron, I think a deck that we may have intentionally avoided discussing in the top 8 of one of the SCG events. That's like a totally reasonable card for that. I was just going to say you can crew with Matter Reshaper, and I'm done. We're done with that.
If your Matter Reshaper has haste, does it become a good card? Philosophical question here.
I will let everyone else ponder that. Is there anything else from deck lists with Kamigawa that we want to discuss here? Or is it all stuff that belongs in Nonsense of the Week?
I kind of assumed this was Nonsense of the Week, but let's take a short break and then officially dive into that, I suppose.
What's up, gamers? Ryan Overturf here to remind you to check out the 540, Star City Games' own Cube podcast, where each week myself and Ryan Sachs discuss anything and everything Cube Draft. From the perspective of Cube designers and drafters alike, we're tackling topics like deep dives into specific archetypes, Cube reviews for new sets as they release, and offering general insights for anybody interested in Magic's greatest format. Whether you're a seasoned Cube drafter or you haven't dipped your toes into the wonderful world of Cube just yet, I think you'll find the listen worth your time. Check out the 540 right here on StarCityGames.com and wherever you find your podcast.
Okay, let's get into what I think is the official Nonsense of the Week segment here. And after whatever the previous thing just was, this might seem tame by comparison, but we do still have some interesting nuggets to get to here.
Yeah, well, the theme of this week's Nonsense of the Week, there's 2 themes. One is Kamigawa cards that we haven't discussed, and the other is monocolor decks. The first one of these, I would like to highlight a Pauper deck that somehow has 5-0 in Modern League. It's not truly a Pauper deck. There are rares in it, but this is basically the Pauper mono blue deck, 5-0ing a league on the back of Moon Circuit Hacker on top of Ninja the Deep Hours with the traditional Pauper crew of like Fairy Miscreant, Fairy Seer, Spellsetter Sprite. Also featuring a bunch of free counterspells, so Disrupting Shoal, Force Negation, backed by Cryptic Command, and just like Islands and Mutavolts. This reminds me of like the Ninja Bear Delver deck from like a decade ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily think that like all the pieces of this deck line up perfectly, but I think that this is an interesting way to use Moon Circuit Hacker to like leverage card advantage. Maybe this isn't the way forward in Modern, but I could definitely see it being the way forward in Pauper or another format.
I do love that sticking to the Pauper roots here, there's no free Otawara or anything in the mana base. We're not getting funky with any of that stuff. It's just 20 islands, 2 Mutavolts, done. Calling it a day. There's no days or gush or anything in this format to justify that. Just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And then I'm almost surprised not to see more of the pitch spells as well. We do actually have the 2 Force Negation, 2 Disrupting Shoal split here in the main deck with the other 2 forces in the sideboard. This, I think, would be a perfectly good home for Subtlety as well. Maybe actually the best home for Subtlety that I've seen in quite a while.
Are you interested in ninjaing your Subtlety back to your hand to recast it? Is that why you're saying this?
Well, I mean, it can just be Time Walk, essentially, to let my first ninja connect. Or, yeah, if I ever get around to hardcasting that thing, then bouncing it back sounds like a good time as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see a couple Subtlety making their way into this deck somewhere. Maybe the sideboard, maybe the main deck, but it does make a lot of sense. And I guess now we start breaking the rules of our theme because we move from a deck that was monocolored to a deck that is not colored, I guess. This is labeled as colorless on MTG Goldfish. This is an aspiring spike joint. This is colorless affinity featuring Mech Hanger. This is a land. It has tap for a colorless, tap for a mana of any color, spend it to only cast pilots or vehicles, but that doesn't matter because none of your cards cost colors. And it has 3 tap, target vehicle becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. You may be wondering why this is happening, and the answer is that there are 4 Consulate Dreadnoughts in this deck. That is the only vehicle anywhere in the 75, and other than that, it is just Mirror Enforcers and Sojourner's Companions and Artifact Lands and Ursa Sagas and Nettlesis, but just all colorless and boating people with affinity. I labeled this as Boat Brew, not the 2009 kind. We don't really need to unravel that for anyone who's not aware of that reference, but this is some funny stuff happening.
Yeah, this is Eldrazi trying to home, kind of, almost. This is a cool deck. I do wonder how flexible that package is in terms of, like, you want Mech Hanger, you want Ursa Saga. At that point, I don't know how ambitious the rest of your mana base can be, and so the whole colorless affinity stuff kind of writes itself. But maybe there is some, maybe like mono white deck, mono blue deck. I'm not sure what the colored card would be exactly that ties it together, but maybe some way of embellishing that whole package. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It is weird to like think about, like, well, if I'm going to spend 4 mana to activate this 7/6 every turn and like trying to min max it, I think that this is best left as an experiment for the real brewers of the format.
Yeah, I know that people got very excited about their colossal plow decks and so on in other formats. Maybe that's going a little too deep in the weeds. I mean, this is a Nonsense of the Week deck, already somewhat deep in those weeds, but not too deep, apparently, to stop it 5-0ing a league. Although, once again, it spikes, so, you know, there's that going on too. The final deck here, this one's a real throwback from almost exactly 20 years ago.
Yeah, so I labeled this one as MBC, yes, the 2002 kind. This is mono black control. There are no new cards in it, but it is just the purest mono black experience you could imagine. There are 4 Liliana of the Veil, 4 Sorin the Mirthless, a split of other Lilianas of the Last Hope and Waker of the Dead varieties, in case you were interested. Waker being the often forgotten M21 one that has like plus each player discards a card, and then your opponents lose 3 if they can't, and then like minus X is something for cards in graveyard and has an emblem that like does something with reanimating things, you know, just very typical Liliana stuff, just like arbitrary 4 mana and abilities. But the part that got me was that there are 2 profane tutors to create a tutor toolbox here, including a main deck Necromentia and a main deck Needle Spellbomb. And then there's just no Cabal coffers at the mana because we have better lands these days. Castle Lochthwain, Hive of the Eye Tyrant, Field of Ruin, and Blaststone all showing up to get 26 lands of value in here. And then the tutor toolbox extends to the sideboard with Nevinyrral's Disc and Thought Distortion and Archon of Cruelty.
I do love, and I think this may be my favorite thing about this deck, is no Urborg in your mono black deck with 4 Blaststone, 4 Field of Ruin. In theory, that could stop you casting your spells at some point, but it's fine. We don't even need to worry about that. And then I do love that the one Liliana the Last Hope, which I guess is joined by a second here in the sideboard, no hope of actually returning a creature with that card in the main deck. 0 creatures main deck, and then just the sideboard creatures are a joy unto themselves. We have 3 Delphi Voidwalker, which that one actually makes a lot of sense. I could even see the 4th copy there. And then 1 Archon of Cruelty, 1 Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. So I love the Archon just because, as you say, no Cabal covers in this deck. We're not cheating the mana requirement. So we're just casting 8 for that thing at some point somehow. I'm not quite sure when, but I really hope that it happens at some point.
Yeah, and also just like the pureness of the fact that the main deck removal is like 4 Fatal Push, 4 Ratchet Bomb, just like, yeah, this is what's happening. And 4 Bloodchief's Thirst. But, like the Ratchet Bombs just really got me. It's just like the classic, like, I've just, put a mono black deck together. What am I possibly missing to destroy? I don't know. I can't kill artifacts or enchantments. Let's put Ratchet Bomb in this deck. It's just like a purity that is often lost these days. It's just really just like quite the deck list. And this is a player who Osman Osgany is actually like probably 10 years ago best known for being like the player who just won everything with fairies back in Extended. So I think this might be like a long time grinder throwback kind of thing.
Or a cry for help of some kind, or what. But yeah, but between 4 Ratchet Bomb and 4 Blast Zone, those enchantments are going down. You think they're safe because you're against a mono black deck. You are wrong, my friend, let me tell you. And that's before we even get to the 2 copies of Feed the Swarm, or 3, excuse me, in the sideboard here. So again, not quite sure exactly which enchantments those are going after, but rest assured we have answers to those. I don't know if this is an insult or exactly whose name this would be besmirching, but this feels to me like if you put a gun to M. Hayashi's head and you force him to build a mono black control deck, this is basically what they would come out with.
Well, no, we went over this a few months ago. That would have Gatekeeper Malakir, and you could rebuy that one with Liliana Lasso. This is like reaching further back. I really think that this is a different breed of mono black deck than the M. Hayashi one would be.
Yeah, but we could put some Gatekeepers in here and then still not put in the Urborg. Just hope we don't have too many like Blast Zone Field of Ruin situations there.
Yeah, that would be also a problem for that card. Yes.
So on that note, I think that's a copious amount of nonsense for this week. You can find us on as always, just losing my verbal faculties here, on Twitter at Dominhavia at ARMLX. You can find our columns for now over at StarCityGames.com. You can find this podcast until the end of February, I suppose, here on this here podcast feed. And until then, we will talk to all of you next time. Take care, everyone.